Welcome to the first episode of Policy RX with the Rock Doc. I'm Eric Murdoch, your host, coming to you from the doctor's office in Estes Park, Colorado. We are going to be doing a lot of episodes. We're going to have guests ranging from climbing advocates to politicians to professional climbers and people that just don't fit into any category. We are going to be talking about climbing policy and politics that affect your climbing opportunities and how we experience the crags. So it's fitting that our first guest ever is Jason Keith. Jason is an attorney, a Chamonix climbing guide. He reminds me of that every time we go climbing. He is a veteran of Access Fund of over 2 decades and probably one of the most successful climbing advocates in the world. And he's here to talk about the new climbing law, the PARC Act, as well as what's going on with the administration these days. Welcome, Jason.
Well, thanks for having me, Eric. I really appreciate being here on the first episode with the Rock Doctor.
Let's get into it. So, the PARC Act, the Protecting America's Rock Climbing Act, passed in early January into law. It looks like it protects climbing and wilderness. It protects existing climbs. It states that fixed anchors are appropriate. How hard was it to get this thing into law?
Well, it almost didn't become law, actually. It came down to the final hours of the 118th Congress, and we'd been working on this for many years. Even before that, we'd been working on this issue, this topic of fixed anchors in wilderness, and so it's been a bumpy road and some progress and always a few steps back, but getting something enacted into law by Congress that recognizes climbing was historic, so it was definitely well worth the wait.
What was the biggest obstacle that you encountered working on this for so many years?
Well, just getting the attention of Congress. Like, are climbers that important? Like, what we do, does that really matter? And, 20 some years ago, it was hard to tell, but we've really been, I think, punching above our weight class and doing a lot of work. We go to DC multiple times a year. We've got relationships with lawmakers and with other stakeholders that are really influential. So we finally got their attention. And I think just working our way through all the kind of complicated legislative processes was time consuming, and then just getting an opportunity for it to get attached to some other legislative vehicle was also really a challenge at the end. So it was really difficult to get it done, and literally we did get it done right at the last minute.
So I'm going climbing next weekend. How is the PARC Act going to change the face of climbing? Is it going to change the way I experience the crag this coming weekend?
Well, the answer to that is no. That's the good news. What we were trying to do is prevent changes to your experience out there in the wilderness, right? I mean, what the PARC Act does is it puts some sideboards on what land managers can do when they deal with fixed anchors in wilderness. And there had been threats for decades, actually, that got more and more acute. And there were actually land management plans and national policies that would prohibit fixed anchors in wilderness. So what we were trying to do is make sure your experience next week wasn't affected by those regressive policies.
So the PARC Act became law in early January, and then we had the inauguration, and suddenly we've got a bunch of new executive orders that affect our public lands. They affect national parks, the Forest Service. What's going on with all these executive orders? What's your analysis of the current state of affairs in Washington, D.C.?
Well, it's too soon to know, really. I mean, if you just focus on the headlines, it sounds pretty chaotic, right? And we don't, there's been some things issued, some things that have been brought back in, and so we don't really know. But there have been executive orders related to public lands, energy development, other issues that could have an effect on how public lands are managed. And it's just they've only been in office for a few weeks now. So we're going to try to work with the administration and members of Congress and make sure that the climbing experience is protected as best we can. That's our job. And we're going to be in D.C. next month, trying to work on Explore Act implementation, and also just meeting with the administration to make sure that our experiences out on public lands are protected.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. We got this law passed. Now we've got the PARC Act, and I think what some people forget is the bigger lift might be, how does the PARC Act get implemented, and how do you work with the Park Service and the Forest Service and the agencies to have the PARC Act take some sort of effect on our public land agencies?
Well, we're going to find out. We're not sure exactly the posture of the land agencies with respect to the PARC Act. We've been setting up some initial just online virtual meetings to try to get a sense of how they're thinking about implementation of Explore and the PARC Act. So we don't know, but like I said, we do have relationships with a lot of the people that are in charge of developing these policies. So we're going to work as partners and collaborate with them and try to instill a sense of partnership with them as we develop these things going forward, and make sure that, the bottom line is, these are policies that relate to wilderness climbing, and the most important thing is protecting wilderness character. What we're not trying to do is water things down, right? But we're also trying to make sure that we preserve these world-class climbing experiences at places like El Cap and in the Wind River Mountains and the North Cascades and Zion National Park. And what had been proposed last year could have really restricted or even made dangerous a lot of those climbing experiences. So we think there's a balance, and we're going to work really hard to try to find that, and we'll find out in the coming months.
Yeah, so obviously there's been a lot of focus on wilderness climbing because what was at stake was the Diamond, El Cap,
right,
climbs in Joshua Tree, and so forth. But the new law affects more than just wilderness, and the agencies are going to have to think about ways to just manage climbing in general. Can you speak to that? We know that the Forest Service hasn't really developed national level guidance, and the Forest Service manages, 30% of America's rock climbing. So what are your thoughts on sort of how the PARC Act is going to affect some of these areas that are not El Cap, that are not the Diamond?
Well, the numbers better than anybody. There's just an enormous amount of climbing on non-wilderness. I live in Moab, Utah. A lot of the stuff around here is not wilderness, right? All of it's not wilderness, actually, and in terms of the climbing. And so, climbing is like one of the only activities that has that large of a user group that doesn't have some kind of policies and management associated with it. So, again, whether it's wilderness or non-wilderness, we're trying to just figure out a way that we can get some effective and durable policies that manage this use, but don't restrict it in unnecessary ways, right? But there are more climbers out there than ever. You go down to Indian Creek, those numbers are just out the roof. And so there's just got to be a better way to address visitation, but make sure that the climbing experience is not impacted in ways that are unreasonable.
What do you got going in the next month or two? What are some adventures that you're planning to go on, or races that you're planning to do?
Well, I do a lot of ultra running races. There's a bunch of stuff around Moab that I'm going to do. I've got some things sketched out for the rest of the year. You're going to be crewing me on a race in West Virginia this fall. So, I just got to get those ducks lined up and make sure that you're not double booked in DC or something.
Hey, listen, thanks so much for being our first guest on Policy RX with the Rock Doc. I have a feeling you're going to be recurring guests joining into conversations. We really appreciate your insight and all your work with Access Fund and as a climbing advocate. So we'll sign off.
I got a face for radio, but as the physician's assistant, I'll be back anytime you call.
Take care, Jason, and we'll see everyone else in a month or so, and we'll cover another topic with the Rock.
Thanks, Eric. See you later.